Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name's Dom Robinson, and welcome to the December edition of SMAF SM Advanced Forum, your monthly. Oh, I've got to mute myself. I've got a big old feedback in my head. Your monthly gathering of expert webcasters who can't start a webcast properly, as is tradition on SMAF. We've managed to get ourselves together to bring you a roundup of the news and general ramblings on about good and interesting topics in and around the streaming industry. As always, I am joined by some guests and my usual hosts. And first of those is Tim Siglin. Tim, are you out there?
Hey, Dom, I am out here. How are you doing?
Not bad. I can see that the Christmas tree has now had the lights put on it. And is that a bauble I can see?
There are multiple baubles on there, we just refer to them as ornaments. The funniest ones, actually, I think, are these right here. These are from a German grocery company called Lidl, which, of course, you know in Europe, but they've just come into the States. And they're selling what are supposed to be German ornaments, but you look at them and they say made in China. So who knows? But instead of sitting in front of the giant map of the world today with my half-done tree, I would actually celebrate the fact that I have a tree here.
Well, so I'm delighted you got your baubles out for SMAF. That's a fantastic thing.
Let me actually. I'm going to pass on to our next host, Eric. What's the weather like in Wisconsin?
Let's take the mute off, old chap. It's the there we go.
I was going to say something about what the weather here is doing to my baubles, but I won't. It's chilly, it's Wisconsin in December, and here I am. But I don't think I'm as chilly as as our guest probably is. So let me introduce our guest and see how he's doing. Ian Nock, coming to us from a car park at the airport, I believe.
Yeah, we're coming to you from slightly chilly car park number 1 at Luton Airport in the UK. Yeah.
And do you know what the disturbing thing about that is, Ian? You have absolutely got the best picture of all of us.
You really do. And as much as we'd like to blame the French for that, like we're blaming them for the air traffic control strike, apparently you've got really good signal there. So are you on LTE or are you on 5G?
No, it's LTE, not 5G at all. That doesn't reach out to Luton these days. Not yet. But
fiber to the car.
Well, I must admit, and also my lighting is just the internal lighting of the car, so it's amazingly working. I don't understand that at all.
I think all you need is a green screen and you're sorted.
Getting slightly chillier, of course, is because I can't have the heating on because the noise of the fan tends to drown out my voice.
So I've actually just been informed from a viewer that I need to shut my blinds, that it's too bright. So I'm going to go do that here in a second. But Dom, I'm going to hand it back to you to mention that we were supposed to have another guest on the show, but I believe she.
Yes, indeed. So Chrysann Sutton sent her sincere apologies for a wonderful reason. She's and I don't want to announce the wrong thing to the world, but she's feeling a bit sick in the mornings at the moment, and today was one of those days. So unfortunately, she can't join us. But we look forward to resuming our normal guests from the Women in Streaming Media Group next month. And actually, just some advance notice: the first Thursday in March, we're going to, as a team, we're going to hand over the entirety of SMAF to the Women in Streaming Media Group in honour of International Women's Day, which falls on the same day. So do tune in for that particular edition. So let's, before we go off on our ramblings around the industry and what's hot to trot, let's just recap what's been going on for all of us. So Tim, you've got back to your seat. The lighting hasn't made any difference, but I would just tell the viewer that they'll have to turn the brightness down on their display.
There we go.
And tell us what you've been up to over the last month. We all saw each other.
Yeah. So I'll talk about Stream Media West in a second. I'm actually what I've been doing in the last 2 days is finishing up an article on algorithms in the CDN space. Michelle, my fiance, who's a math teacher, has been explaining modulo mathematics to me. She's been explaining Horner's method, a number of other things. synthetic division for derivatives. And I've been then translating that into words that I can understand, which has actually been really quite interesting.
People only do that
told
sort of maths for love, you know.
Well, and what's funny is she apparently had been testing her high school kids on that very topic yesterday. So she commented to me that I could just go ask the high school kids, you know, and get the same answer. But one of the things I told Eric yesterday that I found fascinating was I now feel like I feel like I've got a much better grasp on why companies, for instance, like Akamai, do things the way that they do them. So it's been fascinating digging into the math to understand now how content is cached, how it's retrieved, what happens if a server fails, et cetera, not from the engineering standpoint, but from the mathematical standpoint. So that's actually been really quite interesting. In terms of travel, of course, all of us, with the exception of Ian, all of us were at Streaming Media West, and Marquise, who normally is one of our hosts, was with us. In fact, Dom,
I'm not sending his apologies yet because he may yet join us. So he's just having bandwidth issues, connectivity issues where he is. So.
I don't know if we've got the picture, but we actually took a picture that proved that all four of us were in one location, you know, at the same time.
I've uploaded it to be the banner image on our SMAF LinkedIn page now, so you can see.
Oh, fantastic! So if anybody wants to know that all four of us actually exist in the same parallel, same universe rather than parallel universes, they can go to SMAdvancedForum.com.
On LinkedIn, on the LinkedIn site.
Or on the LinkedIn site. Okay, very good. So I had a chance at that show to do a number of interviews. I interviewed people like Yuri Resnick, who is absolutely brilliant and who also has a really good grasp on the math. Interviewed you, Dom. Had a number of people walk through the middle of some of the shots because apparently our setup, when people were on their phones and glanced up, they didn't see us. They saw the word restrooms on the other side of us and would walk straight through the middle. But no, we had a really good number of interviews. Christopher Levy, other people that we've had on the show. So that was me. Eric,
it's very loud.
Eric, how did you sense the show went this time?
It's always kind of hard to gauge when you're in the middle of it, and then afterwards, of course, everyone moves on to the next thing. So, the show moved to Los Angeles this year. We had a little bit more emphasis on the content side of the business. So I did some fireside chats with folks like Awesomeness TV and Philo about what they're doing, in addition to the Video Engineering Summit that Jan Ozer and Robert Reinhardt run. It's such a big show, and that's both a pro and a con. I mean, we typically have 5 or 6 tracks going on at the same time, and so it's always kind of it's exciting at the same time. It's occasionally frustrating because no insult to anyone who has spoken at the shows, but every hour, there was a session going on where I kind of felt, gosh, there are more people who need to hear this and see this. Luckily, we do have all the sessions online. All the videos are at streammedia.com right now, and we've been slowly rolling out the interviews that you did, Tim. And soon it's going to be time for me to start programming Streaming Media East, which is moving to Boston from New York next year. It'll be June 2nd through the 4th.
I don't know, Dom, are you allowed as a Brit to come because Boston was our place of colonial rebellion? Or
I really don't know because I don't even know what country I'll belong to there this time next year.
So yeah, the Brexit.
There's an election next week. We don't even know. Don't even start. Let's not go there.
I don't know. I'm a newly minted Irish citizen, so I'm pretty okay.
You're lucky.
Well, at least you didn't decide to go to France. You went to Ireland instead.
Yeah.
And Eric, I did want to add one other thing. The very last session, which of course was not taped, was by far one of the best ones that I've been to in a while. Roger Pantos's overview of low latency HLS, and it's not just how to make it shorter; it's how to make HLS better. I was very impressed with the the presentation he did there.
It's very articulate.
Yeah, he's great. And, for a session that's that technical, he really did manage to keep people's attention, which is not hard to do, as we all know, in trying to, you mentioned earlier, taking very technical material and translating it so that it's more accessible is a struggle. In fact, I'm looking forward to seeing if I'll be able to understand anything you write about CDN algorithms when you turn it.
I think you will be happily surprised. We'll see. Anyway, so Ian, why are you in the car park? Remind me again.
It's because I have some clients in Central Europe, and I'm spending a lot of time there. So I'm toing and froing and using all the direct flight opportunities from every one of the 6 London airports to get to various places around Central Europe. And it just so happened today I made sure I was going to be back in the UK, but I couldn't account for our lovely French air traffic controllers, who decided to delay the flight just enough that I couldn't get backed up before.
And what's your background in the industry? Because I think you've been in it for a while, if I remember from what Dom said.
My background actually is I was a person who entered the satellite side of the industry back in the day, in the late 90s, with one of the first digital television transmissions from the UK, which was predated Sky. I love mentioning that one, actually. But the only problem with it is it's probably not that famous now because it was broadcast into Poland from the UK. So, but basically, that was my entry to the industry. I then moved onwards with UPC, which is an interesting company, which now lives global, of course, but it allowed me opportunity to get access to every form of video delivery known to man over those period of years, from IPTV through OTT, through cable, through everything, simply because their footprint is so wide and broad. And from that, I moved onwards into the consulting side, and I've continued that sort of multimedia almost working with operators, telecom operators, OTT operators, everything basically. So I'm one of those people who are all things to all man.
Oh, very nice. I actually started back in film and then went to Laserdisc, where we had to assign particular frames to be played for kiosks. So yeah. When you're talking about some of those things, it's actually bringing back memories. Dom, what topics do we have today to talk about?
Well, also, just thinking, I think we might have nearly crossed paths, actually. Were you involved with UPC in cello days?
Yes, very much. The cello on TV, as it used to be called before.
Yeah. So I was tinkering around with the CTO then, doing some multicast stuff. Didn't go very well, but it was a bit early for that.
Yeah, okay, that's on the cello because it was a very complicated company. It still is a complicated company, like most big entities. But yeah, that was I was on the UPC side doing the first digital deployments they had in the Netherlands and in Austria, and also Sweden and Norway. So got to do a lot.
Interesting. Let's not bore the viewers with just defragging that, but we'll do that more at a later point. But yeah, no, it's so sorry, Tim. You were asking. Streaming Media West was I thought was excellent. The hidden surprise for me was sitting in the esports track. Actually, not expecting very many people to be wandering in there, but there was a presentation I was keen to see, and I would have said 2/3 of the room was full of all the heavy hitters who were at the conference, all the big telcos, all the big encoding vendors, all the people representing the largest companies had all descended on the e-gaming and e-sports track for half a day or whatever it was. But it was just interesting to notice who was in the room as much as the content.
And one of the things that's fascinating there is, if Vivix was owned by Williams, then was acquired by Level 3, now is owned by CenturyLink. They made an announcement recently that they're looking to push Vivix into a number of esports venues in the States and Europe. So clearly, their traditional model had been big venues of major sports. They see esports as having an equivalent weight to that now. So that's fascinating to hear what you're saying about the heavy hitters, sort of descending on the conference.
Yeah, it was. It's more than 50% of if you combine games and media and entertainment now, it's more than 50% of the total value of that space. So, we've got to take gaming seriously in our space. to all intents and purposes, it is video streaming. So
yeah. So what other conferences have you been in? I think last month you were in Stockholm when we actually did SMAF. And what else?
That's right. Yeah, just spent that was right. It was at the end of the day of Streaming Tech Sweden that I was. You ran the show because I was struggling to get myself online in a hotel room and so on. But
well, and you also had a cast on your arm as well at that point.
I'm fully back in action. I can now give the finger to whoever needs to be given the finger to. That's the important thing. So yeah,
for the election coming up, but regardless.
Exactly, I've been saving a little bit of energy for needed to be fit and fighting for next week. But my voting hand, you know. Yeah, so Streaming Tech Sweden was really good, and actually, I think they've been exemplary in just how they're following up, and the media that they've been putting out is good, clear cut, well promoted. They do a good job. Eric's always highlighted how well their events up there are put together, and they really stand out. So that was good. And I saw Magnus again at Video Exchange Europe, which I was at yesterday and the day before, which was good actually, and there's probably quite a lot of topical stuff to talk about in there. First thing I thought was interesting is I had my analogy at the end of yesterday was I felt like a kitchen fitter in a room full of people discussing recipes. So it wasn't a technical conference. The technical infrastructure people were there, but actually it was quite packed. There was probably 300 people there, and they were all talking sort of opinions about rights and content packages and so on. And they were really from 5-10 years ago, they would have been the IPTV guys in the telcos and the broadcasters, but they're all trying to sort of position in the OTT space. But every third sentence contained the words Disney Plus or Netflix and some comparison to them. And I've started to glaze over when it's just people opining about that stuff. But so some of it was good, but in there were some excellent technical presentations. Fastly gave a really good opening session, and then again we had a sort of slightly more technical track that I'd shared in the afternoon of the second day, which really replaced Content Delivery World, which has run for 10 years on that date and in that event. So it's a bit of a shame to see the back of Content Delivery World, but this was a little bit broader, and there was a panel I ran with TVU, BT Sport, and Fastly on it. And it was actually it was about sort of sports and event production and distribution, innovation in that space, and so on and so forth. With quite a lot of talk about 5G and some interesting, I would say, ambivalence about 5G, and I felt that at Streaming Media West as well. So I think, as a sort of springboard topic to kick off, I think there were more topics from Video Exchange Europe that I can come back to, but as a springboard topic, I'd be interested to sort of hear from you guys where your heads are at with 5G.
5G to me, one of the problems in the States is there's reality and then there's marketing. And AT&T, 8 months ago, tried to roll out what they called like 4.5G, which really wasn't, they were trying to get the portion 5G in there. I think they've only just recently announced that they're actually starting to try to roll out 5G in the States. One of the big issues we have here, and Ian, you might appreciate this given your satellite background, is we have the C-band alliance, which is Intelsat, a couple other companies, who are arguing that they should do a private auction of C-band so that the 5G providers in the U.S. could get access to a portion of their spectrum to use in a very short period of time. And the FCC came back and said, no, we're going to do a public auction, which means it's going to delay it to sort of the end of 2020. Interestingly, the satellite companies don't own that spectrum, but what they have is a perpetual license. So there's now this argument in the States as to who actually owns the spectrum and who can sell it and who gets what from it, after the point. In some ways, not unlike what happened here in the States when the when the over-the-air broadcasters gave up a part of their spectrum, for auction for the wireless carriers as well. So it seems like, Don, there's a lot of moving parts, at least here in the States, that haven't come together. And so I suspect we're looking at 2021, 2022 to really see consistent rollout of 5G, and what that will mean in terms of wave and some of these other sort of spectrum allocations is sort of uncertain at this point.
Ian, any thoughts about 5G?
Yeah, no, I think that's what you're saying. I think really people talk about deploying 5G today, but all people are really doing is deploying the enabler technology. They haven't got the additional spectrum yet to actually take advantage of millimeter wave, etc. And they're not really using it for anything more at the moment than trials of implementations of some of the technology that is yet to come, certainly in the video contribution space. But overall, in terms of what the consumer is seeing at the moment, just slightly faster 4G.
Yeah.
And even then, it's not necessarily slightly faster, considering the improvements in 4G that are taking place.
So one of the speakers at the conference yesterday, Matt Stagg, who's head of mobile strategy for BT Sport, and also for mobile strategy or content strategy for EE. I think that's I forget the specifics, but and he's been very close to things like the Mobile Edge Compute Forum and so on. Some interesting little nuggets he dropped. I didn't know that one of the reasons why 1 millisecond latency from 5G towers was a critical KPI, and it was for autonomous driving. So it was a specification that was gathered from that side of the industry. But interestingly, that's impossible to achieve without an edge compute system located at the RAN. So in practice, it's much more likely to be 10 to 15 millisecond back to the core.
Yeah.
And I think so it was interesting that autonomous driving was a key one, but in the media space, really 10 millisecond, 120 millisecond to start buffering for 30 seconds or 10 seconds or 4 seconds or whatever it is, it's not going to make that much difference to most media distribution paths in some senses. There is an argument that if you have fiber to 5 times as many masts, then you can share the spectrum more efficiently. So you can create more load on the edge of the 5G networks in a more dense environment, in effect. But then, of course, you need 5 times as much power.
Yeah.
And that's a big ask for cities and so on. So I think there's some way to go before.
Yeah. Well, another fun thing with that is that if you need 5 times as many masts, certainly in the UK is particularly restrictive with regard to placement of masts. It's quite a long-winded process to get the permission to deploy.
Well, they're much smaller masts, so they're under.
But they still require the same planning requirements, regardless. And in fact, one of the things that holds back even 4G, particularly in older cities, like I live in Kent in the UK, and I got a city nearby, Canterbury, and it simply doesn't have enough masts in place to provide 4G properly.
Even in Brighton, we've had a sort of public movement against 5G now. It just stopped deployment. It's pushed it back up to government to prove that there are no health risks. There's enough. There's a fringe vaxxer community who are into it, but it's not without some gaping holes that they're asking that haven't been answered. And it might, I don't know. I've had long chats with this that amused Eric. That it reminds me of the tobacco industry a little. It's the only people doing the research are the very, very same people who really wouldn't want that research to stand up against them. So.
And there's been a lot of discussion about that, but there's a lot of science that really demonstrates that the biggest issue for anyone with any health risks with a radio transmission is you're sticking a radio transmitter right next to your head, and that's up to you to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not ionizing radiation as well, which is the key issue. People have maybe a misunderstanding between ionizing radiation and normal radiation, because we are bathed in radiation every day. That's called light.
Yeah.
But there's lots of discussion.
It is interesting that I don't think 5G is a dead cert, despite the telcos doing heavy marketing of it at the moment. I think it's I think it's a bit of a what if. So, I'm gonna rile you here. So do you think that selling high end capability like that has any parallels to the upsell of TV resolution.
To a degree, yes.
Okay, damn, you're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to come out.
I'm a pragmatic guy, but the thing here is it's all about providing a great experience, and for those people who can afford it, a greater experience. And I think that's what the thing is with 5G. So I know people who have 5G mobile phones, and they love the fact that they can get 250 or 400 megabits per second in central London compared to my 150. But frankly, I get everything I need done with 150. And actually, I get everything I need done with 25 because I'm sat here in an airport doing a
live stream
on 4G with no particular issue.
Yeah.
But and I think that's the thing. But when it comes to a 4K TV, you get a 4K TV with its capabilities, and it will give you the best experience that you can afford to have. Make the content look as good as it can be, and it's just up to you. You know, you get what you pay for, but there is a diminishing return, but there is a return.
Yeah,
you paying out. That's how it works.
So I find something interesting here, sort of going back to the 50,000-foot view. In the industry, we've always talked about finding the sweet spot of bandwidth for contribution, bandwidth on the last mile, and the codec itself. And what I find fascinating is, okay, 1080p full HD came along, and then very quickly after that, the consumer technology companies wanted to push 4K to us. That was 2012, 2013, and in talking to a SMPTE fellow at that point, he said, realistically, we're not going to see 4K broadcast over the air, for another 5 or 6 years, and he was right. We've been really slow on that. We had HEVC come along, and HEVC makes sense for 4K contribution because you need better compression to be able to push that over limited pipes. Now we have 5G coming along, which expands the pipes from a contribution standpoint. And it does sort of beg the question of, did we miss the sort of perfect sweet spot in the industry? Or are we now at a point where we have more bandwidth than we need? And what's that going to mean for contribution and compression and that kind of just means we can do more contribution feeds per given cellular bond or what?
Yeah, I think that the thing about this is the speed is great, and it's making some very small number of people happy and provides capabilities for a very, very small percentage of people. But the thing that that higher speed gives is at the lower speeds, it gives more consistency. And I think that's much more of what is important to us. And I've got a consistent 4G connection right now, and it's giving me everything I need. And that's great. Whereas a few years ago, I would be having stuttering sometimes because it wasn't consistent. And I think there's a similar comparison with 4K and HDR. Everyone focuses on the 4K resolution. That gives you an ability to have this greater quality of display, etc. But actually, it's the HDR bit that came along with it that is the most important thing. But it's the thing that nobody buys. So nobody buys consistent mobile phone coverage. They buy fast coverage, but they receive consistent. Nobody wants to buy resolution as such. They just want to buy a big TV and have great pictures, and that's what the HDR brings you. So I think we're buying the wrong. We're almost like people sell one thing, but we're actually the benefit is another thing.
And that brings up an interesting point. So Disney Plus launched. They have Mandalorian, which I've not seen, but I understand has Baby Yoda in it because I keep seeing all these memes now with Baby Yoda. Eric, you've watched it. There's been talk.
Sorry, can I just interject? Have you seen the stat that's going around that 98% of Americans have seen The Mandalorian, but only 2% have a Disney Plus subscription?
and only 2% of those have actually paid for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, Eric. So there's been talk about how Mandalorian is in 4K, but it's not in high dynamic range or fake HDR. I mean, what's your sense in watching it?
Well, yeah, my family and I binge watched the first 4 episodes over the weekend and really loved them even before Baby Yoda showed up. I mean, it's a terrific program. It's definitely Hollywood film production value rather than television production value. But it was one of those shows that I kept thinking to myself, this is really dark on my screen. And then I saw the report that came out Monday, I think, or Tuesday, that indicated that Disney is not actually delivering this in true HDR, but in a sort of fake HDR, which, if your television is set to recognize and play HDR content, may mean that it's playing back darker than it would otherwise. So when we watch episode 5, I'm definitely going to turn HDR off and see how it looks. But I don't believe Disney has, of course they haven't, has responded to the question about whether or not it's in true HDR or not. Have they?
Yeah. Not I've heard. But I know something. There are some people who are out there who have actually analyzed the content and identified that at no time during the display of the content does the peaks of brightness within that content go above 200 nits, and that really confirms that it is definitely SDR within a HDR container. So it's, as far as the TV is concerned, it's HDR, but of course none of the peak highlights on the content, not even when there are laser blasts, go above 200 nits, which is basically it's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly viewable, but it's definitely not HDR in its reality.
Well, and I'm going to come from the purist standpoint. Having come out of a film background, we always got annoyed when you'd see film on TV because they'd have to, crush everything down. So the blacks got crushed, the whites got crushed. The argument that came back to us, maybe the argument that Disney and others are using now, which is we've got to do it on a bunch of devices that aren't capable of HDR. Therefore, we're going to send it out as SDR. But if they're arguing that it is HDR, the SDR-based players know how to handle that. The HDR players know how to handle the difference on it. And to Eric's point, if he watches it with HDR turned off and it looks better, it sort of begs the question of who's making the encoding decisions at Disney for this content being pushed out.
Yeah.
Not unlike
it is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, it is questionable because, as I say, the SDR version of this, it's probably graded to 100 nits. It might be graded a little bit higher than that for modern displays. But you display that on a modern HDR TV, and most people have their television set so it actually boosts it. So it's at 200, 300, 400 nits top peak brightness, which actually is better than when it's decoding the HDR version.
Well, and if
when I say better, I mean better. Brighter is better for many people. So
yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, Eric, when you talk about dark, remember probably 5-6 months ago we talked about the Game of Thrones episode. That was incredibly dark, and that was intentionally incredibly dark, but was designed to be watched in a room that was a theater quality room as opposed to on your phone.
And in fact, at IBC, IBC always has its big screen experience, and one of the things they showed in the big screen theater this year was, and they pitched it this way, was come see that episode of Game of Thrones the way it was intended to be seen.
But Michelle and I went to see The Lion King in that theater, and they did the promo for Dolby Vision afterwards. What was amazing was they said, this is what you think black and white looks like, and then they showed the HDR version. Clearly, to Ian's point, much, much brighter, much darker. So it's there if you can give people content that they can see. But I guess it's scary that we're pitching HDR when perhaps it's not up to snuff.
But that gets back to Ian. You mentioned earlier that you're skeptical as to whether or not people are actually buying televisions based on whether they offer HDR or not. What's in it for Disney to say that it's HDR if it's not actually HDR? I mean, how many...
Go faster, Stripes.
It's pretty honest. I don't think many consumers even understand what the HDR aspect means. Maybe they're starting to creep through with it. I think they've sold it more on the 4K part. But going back to a point about the Game of Thrones and actually now here with the Mandalorian, in terms of the decision making about how to actually distribute that out to people, when you produce the content and you distribute the content in a way that's different from the way it was produced. Use a subpar performance. So with the Mandalorian, it's obviously captured in SDR, and they've put it into a HDR container, delivered it as that, and it then hasn't really been a great experience. And with that episode 3 of season 8 of Game of Thrones, that one was captured in HDR, and they just didn't produce it for distribution to normal displays. In fact, nobody out there was receiving it in HDR on a distribution side. So why didn't they actually make a better version of an SDR version of that content? And it's the same here with going back to the Mandalorian. You've got to somehow think about how are the consumers actually watching this and make it best for what the consumers are watching it as.
Are the LUT tables not think about that. Are they not backwards compatible properly? I mean, I'm presuming what's happening is you're widening the dynamic range, but the midpoint is being moved.
I think with this I don't know if he even did that with the Mandalorian content. It may just literally be a simple just slot and insert into the container, and it is actually SDR as HDR in a HDR container. But with Game of Thrones, the challenge there is simply that if you distribute something in SDR, which is what it was distributed as, but you produced it in HDR and not do anything special with it in terms of the grading and producing an SDR grade for it, it's just going to look bad. It really is. People not matching the consumption to the production.
So I want to comment on something Eric said about IBC, and then I want to move on to another topic that Dom had mentioned. So, Eric, you mentioned that they did the pitch of come see Game of Thrones the way that it's intended to be seen in the theater. Is it The Irishman? That's the new Scorsese film. So Netflix, of course, wanted to do a much shorter release window in theaters, but wanted to potentially do day and date release in theaters as well as on streaming. They couldn't come to an agreement with theaters on doing that. But what's interesting is now Scorsese's coming out and saying, don't watch The Irishman on your phone, because he never intended it to be displayed in that small of a form factor, etc. But it sort of begs the question on stuff like Mandalorian that's streaming only or Irishman that's streaming only. There's a really nice opportunity for theaters to say, look, we'll do a 2-day release of it so you can see it as it's intended, and then you can go back and watch it on your on your phone, on your set-top box, etc.
To that point, didn't Netflix just buy cinema?
Well, they have, and of course Disney with Buena Vista and a number of. I mean, to me, it presents a really interesting model that says, streaming only content for 2 days, you can come pay a premium, sit in a theater and watch it. To me, that actually would be a way for the theaters to get short run, high interest stuff around the time that it's released, rather than looking at it as, we don't get it for 60 days, therefore we're not going to carry it because it doesn't fit our traditional model. What do you all think about that kind of thing?
I think I don't know what they thought about with The Irishman, how watching it as it was intended to be, because it's a 3-hour, 30-minute film. If it was as it was intended to be, it would have a natural comfort break in the middle of it.
Like Bollywood. Yeah, exactly.
And anyone who watches a 3-hour, 30-minute movie on a phone, that's some going.
Yeah.
Right.
Deserve what they're getting at that point, I think.
Yeah, it also, though, makes me think of, and I know we need to move on to another topic, but this tension between production and consumption makes me think of how within the last month or so, Netflix announced that it was trialing giving viewers the ability to speed up playback. There was outrage from directors, and this goes back to what you said earlier, Tim, regarding film producers who would just break their hearts when they saw the colors and the range crushed for the small screen. But directors are saying, are absolutely up in arms about giving consumers the ability to change the pacing of the film. And it's interesting when it brings up the tension between the artistic creation and intention and consumers saying, no, I want to be able to watch it slightly faster than it was intended.
I get both arguments, but I definitely live in the latter camp. What does Scorsese have to do with how I want to watch his film?
Because he controlled it before for you. He wants to control.
No, poor him. Shouldn't have ever let anyone have
I'm
it.
not sure.
He should only show
I'm
it
not
in
sure
his
he
private.
controlled it down my local Odeon. I know that much.
I think if you want to do that, and actually, it's almost like musicians. He has an opportunity to literally have private showings in his ideal environment, which is actually like a live performance from a musician. Most musicians' music is heard as a crushed MP3 through 1-inch speakers. But if you want to hear that musician's sound in its fullest, you go and see them live.
Well, and that's sort of my positing about this idea of the theaters is if you want to go see it as it's fully intended, do it as a limited engagement in theaters. Because now with digital delivery into theaters, it's easy enough for them to switch up showing content, over the course of 1 or 2 days. And if it ends up being popular, you hold it over for a period of time, etc. That's a business model that would have to be addressed. But I think it's an opportunity for theater owners who have those environments that are set up for that kind of content as well.
I think there has been more positive conversations about theatre in the last sort of year. I've heard more people talking more positively about cinema again.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of speeding up, sports was the topic I wanted to come back to. And in the UK, of course, Amazon has announced that they've got the exclusive right to stream a couple Premier League games. Now, you're an Irish citizen now, Ian, so you may not be able to comment on Premier League, and Dom doesn't particularly really care about soccer.
I can try.
So this may be a dud conversation, but just I want to throw it out. What's the big deal about it? And you mentioned beforehand in Boxing Day having something to do with it. So give me your position on this.
Well, this it's interesting because I don't watch sports on television for the sport. So I watch it for the TV part. I quite famously spent because I don't watch any sport at all. I'm not a guy. But here I am in television. I have football mainly from the World Cup last year, but here we have the Amazon Premier League. I've only seen it on a mobile phone at this point, so I've got to see the fuller experience and analyze it there. But I've been following how people have felt about what it looks like, and there's been some positive comments, but there's also been quite a lot of negative comments, particularly from people in the industry. And I think that the important thing to think about here as well is this has been a long time coming. Amazon bought this particular package of a window of games over this Christmas period of 2019, 2020. They bought them back in the middle of 2018, and everyone looked at them and went, why have they done that? And, it was such targeted things. So there's obviously Amazon spent the last 18 months building up to this, and you can see now what it's being used for. It's being used as a marketing push to sell Prime. So that's what they're doing. But what we've got there now is what people have been saying about it is that people have seen okay experiences, but there's some people who are a little bit sensitive about frame rate who are pointing out that this is at 25p, and sport with 25p is a bit jittery, and not really the great experience. Other people have been seeing the fact that although it's supposed to be put out there as 4K HDR, that the HDR is a bit drab, that some people aren't even getting above 1080 because they're limited some way by either their ISP or Amazon themselves. So, and Amazon hasn't really said much about that, but it will be interesting as these games go on over the next 2 to 3 weeks to watch and analyze how this performs and see how successful it really is. But I know there are some people saying, Amazon may be great at the video delivery side, but when it comes to live sports, maybe not so great.
Well, it's interesting. So you mentioned the 25p, and of course, 25 frames per second versus 50 frames per second in the States here, 30 versus 60. 5 years ago, that really wasn't that big of a thing. I mean, everything was done in 25, and then of course I guess if you had interlaced, it was, essentially.
Well, that's the thing. Interlacing made up for it. Did actually improve the experience. So when you have 50, when it was interlaced at 50, then that's great. That actually it allowed for the motion blur, it allowed for that smoother experience. But cutting it down straight to 25p and not having the interlace in there to make up for that, to make it a smoother look, it obviously people are noticing, and it's quite jarring. And it is, people are raising the question, when are people going to realize that 50p 60p in the US is a much better format. In fact, reality-wise, if we get 120, that'd be really good as well. But that's a little way off in the future, because my experience of the World Cup from the BBC was that was in 50 frames per second, and that was a great experience, and people really loved that.
So let me ask this: does the average, soccer fan, football fan, they're used to watching it on TV at 50 frames per second. They step back to streaming and it's at 25 frames a second. Are they blaming their internet connection, or are they blaming Amazon as you work back?
I think the only people I know who really notice the 25p who say it about the 25p are those in the industry, and they're blaming Amazon. They are actually obviously saying, why Amazon? Why? You can do 50p.
Were they sure that they were getting top of ladder quality stream as well?
Oh yes, believe me, the people I know are very specific with debug on their TVs and everything, so they are seeing it, and it is quite, but it's also quite noticeable. And I from watching on my mobile today, you see the quality of my connection here. What I was seeing was still quite a lot of artifacts in the quality of it, and it was streaming at much less than what my connection should allow, really. So I think there is some moderation taking place in Amazon.
So there was one of the really interesting things about that was at the Video Exchange conference. I was talking to some of the BT guys, and on the Tuesday I realised they were all getting a bit excited about going off to go and do their football thing, and my brain didn't add it up until I'd had a couple of beers, and I was like, why were the BT guys going off to do football things? It's Amazon. And got chatting, and it was, despite Amazon bidding against BT Sport and Sky Sports for the rights for this content, Amazon used BT for the production.
Yes.
And the content generation, and the relationship had principally sort of developed because they needed to get. One of the reasons they were confident that they could alleviate pressure off the CDN was by supporting a model for delivery into pubs. Pubs needed a quasi-guaranteed broadband and a bit of oversight from the local telco ISP. So basically, BT got involved to drive more high-quality broadband into pubs to set them up to then pull these streams at better quality using whatever combination of CDNs Amazon and BT use. Now, I wasn't quite clear where the workflow transitioned from BT to Amazon, but it seemed to me that Amazon aggregated the production feed, and then I think was probably taking a mezzanine from production and creating the bitrate ladders in AWSE, and then handing that off to multiple CDNs. That's as much as I can unpiece it from bits and pieces that I've seen. So that gets interesting, because then if the 25 frames a second is a challenge, that might be an AWSE limit. And I know that some of the clouds were quite a long way behind in being able to offer higher frame rate, higher quality bitrate in their public transcoding offerings. And I'd need to go and have a look. But it may be that the high def, the higher end encoding that AWSE could do from the mezzanine just may not have been possible in the workflow model that they're delivering, and it may be because they're planning for scale to do 15 games simultaneously or whatever it is, rather than worrying too much about the pure high quality.
They don't really have that scale. It is literally only 20 matches. It's going to be so short. It'll be gone as quickly as anything else. They spend 18 months preparation for a 3-week period with 20 games.
Sounds sort of like the Olympics and the World Cup, the problems we all have with those.
Well, much smaller. I mean, I produced the Conference League for BT 15 years ago, and it's a couple of Windows servers and a portable encoder, and off you go. It was easy then. So I don't know what fuss they're making, really, but anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's worth, given the fact that it is so short of an experimental time frame, it's worth Dom probably coming back to this one next month and assessing if I'm assuming the production was in 50 frames per second, especially if BT is helping with part of that. And ultimately,
I think it was just normal BT Sport production, to be honest.
Yeah,
with different title pack, and then obviously Amazon are probably working social media in a way that BT and others aren't. So,
and that sort of leads back into what you said, where this is a nice marketing ploy to push people to get Prime, because Boxing Day and Christmas are coming up, and you might as well, get this added to what you already going to get, which is free shipping. And that's interesting. So, any other
key KPI is how many Prime deals they get.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, let's see, Dom, you talked about from Video Exchange, you talked about sport, you talked about the HDR stuff. You wanted to talk about TikTok, though. What we're coming down sort of close to the end. What's your on TikTok? I know you have opinions.
Yeah, slightly. So it's sort of combination thing. So TikTok keeps appearing and nobody's talking about it. A little bit like, oh, this is my daughter's thing or my kid's thing. I shouldn't really. It's kind of being swept under the rug. But there was a session on which was talking. A lot of people very senior in sort of content bundling and this sort of long job titles with at least 3 parts to it. Kind of having these strong opinions about what was going to happen in the subscriber markets, and they went on and on and on. There was no discussion whatsoever about piracy and piracy management and so on. And actually, if you look online, there isn't the top 10 traffic on the internet from multiple different measures. You've got sort of Netflix at the top of the bar. I think it's just been superseded by Longtail, so a big aggregate of lots of HTTP media streaming. But then you've got Netflix, you've got YouTube, you've got Twitch, Amazon. You've got it's only and you see TikTok and piracy are sitting at about the same level, at about 8 and 9 on that global traffic list. So the piracy of content is kind of on par with a single website, which is something that I don't think we're really, I don't feel very tuned into the culture of people using that. But I think that I keep harping on about this at the moment. I think there's just such huge growth volume of user-generated content coming. It's certainly on par traffic-wise now with piracy. And there isn't anything above those in terms of global bandwidth use that remotely represents a traditional broadcast brand. And I think that's very telling. You don't have Disney Plus will probably enter that chart. I would be surprised if Disney Plus by this time next year aren't in the top 10 traffic traffic patterns in the US. I don't know that Disney Plus is going to get anything like global penetration of Netflix because I just don't think they have the same focus on localization. But I think everyone needs to be keeping an eye on players like Twitch and TikTok much more, because I think these actors are they're serious network users. They're serious players, and if they can monetize properly, they're going to dwarf people's time and people's demand for content. If that's if a culture of kids grow up with this short form content, they just may never switch onto Disney Plus.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. I was just going to say that YouTube, of course, started with user-generated content. They just announced here in the last couple of weeks that they're indeed quite profitable. But obviously, they shifted the model away from UGC, and now others have to pick that up. So TikTok makes sense. Other social media platforms. Eric, I think I interrupted. You were going to make a comment.
Yeah, TikTok. Much like brands and content creators started creating content for Snapchat, we're seeing that with TikTok now. An interesting anecdote I heard recently was that TikTok is actually having an effect on the way music producers are creating beats. If you go to YouTube, for instance, right now, there are thousands of music producers, DJs across the world who are creating beats, putting them up on YouTube. You can download those beats and use them yourself as the basis for songs. That's how Old Town Road, the biggest song in the state this year, happened. Someone went to YouTube, and you can either pay a pittance, $10, $15 to use the beat non-exclusively, or you can pay actually what's also a pittance in the big scheme of things, like $200 or $250 to buy it outright, and then the creator takes it off YouTube. So the basis of Old Town Road was a beat that cost the creators $250 to use. Now what's happening is because of the cadence and the rhythm of TikTok videos, where quite often you'll have a sequence for about 10 seconds, and then akin to the bass drop in a club, it changes radically. The visuals change radically. Producers are now creating beats specifically with TikTok in mind. So the creative industry, at least, is responding very quickly to what's happening with TikTok. I'm not sure that, you know, as you said in a recent column for Streaming Media, Dom, the traditional broadcast and video industry tends to be pretty slow to pick up on things. But I agree, Dom, that that's where the future is.
You know, somebody comes out with a tool that's that makes that type of ultra short form production really slick. It's really kid friendly, or it's really user friendly in a more generic term, and they have an affordable price point on it. Those sort of tools are appealing to massive volume markets now, and those guys are going to make some. I think they're primed to make some interesting revenue.
Well, another thing along those lines, this takes me back not all the way to my film days, but back when I was a video editor, you know, we would use tools that would allow us to tap inputs and output points on beat to a song so that we could do rapid cuts. It was really painful because you were using videotape, but ultimately machine learning gets us to that point where, if to what you're saying, Eric, you know, it's sort of short attention span audio and it shifts up at 10 seconds and then goes into a different style, you're going to almost have to use machine learning to, you know, do that. But if you got a nice tool that lets you basically cut every less than a second, say every 7/10 of a second, to a different image, and then kids just lay the images in there and the thing auto generates for them, it then does create sort of really slick production value and allows the artist to partly automate the art, but also, you know, sort of manipulate it in a way that would have taken hours and hours to do before.
Yeah. Listen, guys, we're coming up to the end of the hour. Let's have a quick round of 2020 predictions, because that's always a good game to play at the end of a December show. So let's start with Ian, because you're our guest, and it's been great to have you on. Ian, give us a few off the top of your head predictions for 2020. Okay. Short term or long term, whatever comes to mind.
Really big. Yeah, a really big prediction, I think, right now. And it's something we haven't talked about during this session up till now. And I think it's growing. I think that's down to operators, traditional operators out there, even non-traditional operators, who are pushing out full service television platforms delivered over the top only through streaming. We're seeing that now with Vodafone. They're doing that within Portugal. They're doing it in Hungary. They're doing it in other countries. And I think more and more visibility will be seen of traditional operators pushing out products that are not delivered via their managed networks.
Interesting. Cool. How about you, Eric? What's your feelings for 2020?
Big picture. I don't know if I have an overarching 50,000-foot prediction, but I think that much like we need to watch TikTok, I was skeptical at first, but I think we need to watch Quibi, the Quick Bites service that Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman are helming. There have been a lot of mobile-only video services. Go90 comes to mind that have fallen flat, but I think this one actually has the prospects of really taking off.
I have an anecdote about that with my daughter. I described Quibi to her, and I must admit her response was very telling. Have they not heard of YouTube?
Oh, yes, they have, and they're finally figuring out how to make it work for in a more traditional model.
Cool. How about you, Tim? What's in your mind for 2020?
Well, one of my predictions is that this tree will actually go down after Christmas. I can't be certain, but there's a good possibility.
You're just going to turn the lights off and consider Christmas over, aren't you? That's it. Job done. Turn them on in December.
But I want to jump onto something. One thing that struck me out of IBC, Ian, was Harris, which is now Imagine. A lot of broadcasters use their tools and services and like that. And one of the things that I saw that was intriguing was David Heppy, is the head of that. They put out a press release about how they're doing an OTT monetization service powered by AWS, specifically geared toward those over-the-air broadcasters to essentially allow them to put a solution together that looks the same online as it looks over the air. That's intriguing if they can do that, because it will bring those traditional programmers onto the web in a way that they can understand OTT, as opposed to having to learn a whole new set of languages.
Yeah,
which I think's intriguing. And then the other thing that I think, and I wrote my Streams of Thought column yesterday, 2020's one of those points that to me as a kid was out there. I mean, it was so far in the future that it was almost incomprehensible. And I'm challenging people in that article to go back to the beginning of streaming, back around 1997, and read some of the big, hairy, audacious goals that we had, and see those haven't been addressed, and whether we could address them in 2020 going forward to 2050. So,
yeah.
Very
What about
nice.
you, Tom?
I was just going to say from that, well, based on Tim's, I think we'll go for IP multicast again. No,
why not?
Just because I knew it would make you all laugh.
It's coming. People are still trying it.
Oh yeah, my hot topic. No, Eric and Tim will go. No, don't start him off right. So I won't. No, I think there's a schism happening in the CDN and edge compute space that I'm specifically really interested in at the moment, and I'm talking to lots of people about it. Basically, so not the generic edge compute, which a lot of the telcos are, they just don't get computers enough to be talking about edge compute. But the CDN guys have been running big, large distributed compute networks since year dot. They are the masters of it, and what they do is going to teach the telcos how to play in layer 4. And right now, there's a very interesting, almost purposeful schism appearing in the CDN space that's absolutely fascinating me, and everyone's quite open about it. When you talk in the sort of community, everyone's quite open about it, but it will lead to two schools of thought in how operators deploy edge compute, and that will lead to two different schools of applications that end up in the market. So that's my hot spot for the next.
And Dom, you mentioned speed earlier when from Video Exchange, you're talking about speed to the edge versus speed to the core. Fastly has actually come out in this last month and said we have the fastest fastest CDN in the world at 35.4 microsecond startup time. That is only to the edge. That is not to the core. So if it's got to go back to origin server, as you say,
right, and it seems to be that there's just some interesting separation of even similar terms that people are using differently. That I'm, with my wordsmith hat, I'm following a little bit. Anyway, listen, my AirPods are telling me that they're going to run out of batteries, and I think we're all going to run out of batteries. It's run over 5 minutes, but it's been an excellent SMAF. I don't know how I ended up emceeing. Normally it's Tim doing this job, but sorry, I muscled
I'm
it.
tired of putting stuff on the Christmas tree, Dom.
It's your baubles have all wilted you out there. So I think with no further ado, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Ian. If you're there, you have to say hello to say goodbye, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I'll see you all, guys.
Thanks very much, and we'll see you at the beach at IBC, if not before. Always. Eric, are you out there to say goodbye?
I am out there. I am out here, and it's been a great one. And we'll the first of the year, right? Pretty soon after. I think January 2nd will be our next one.
January the 2nd, we'll be picking hangovers out of each other and things. So that'll be good. And Tim, thank you as well.
Oh, absolutely, Dom. Anytime. Always appreciate it.
Cool. And for those that are gluttonous for awful music mashups, I'm also on air again in about 4 hours on the Thursday night show DJing for Christmas. So we'll be mixing classic Christmas tunes with jungle, of course. Streaming at its very best. Right. Thanks all. Have a great Christmas, and we'll catch you next month.